The Hall of Oaths smelled of stone and old smoke, and the particular cold that comes only from a space that has been grand for centuries and has stopped trying to prove it. I stood at the top of the dais and watched the pack lords file in below me, 43 of them, counting their seconds and their ritual witnesses, the whole human architecture of submission arranged in tiered benches that curved in a half-moon around the floor. The iron seal was set into that floor at the center, a disc of hammered black metal, 8 feet across, inlaid with the old wolf script of the founding compact. It had been placed there by my great-great-grandfather's great-grandfather. In 400 years, no one had seen it do anything at all. That was the point of it. The seal was a reminder, not a test. It was a monument to a time when such things had been necessary, when bloodlines had needed proving and destinies had needed witnesses made of metal rather than men, because men could be bought. Now it was simply there, a permanent feature of the floor, the way a hearth is simply there in a hall, so old and so inevitable that no one questions it and everyone steps around it. The ceremony today was not the seal's concern. The ceremony today was a bonding rite, or rather, the first portion of one, the formality of submission in which 3 minor packs acknowledged Ashenvale's authority over their territory disputes and presented their offerings of goodwill before the actual bonding candidate was introduced. Dre, my second, had managed the scheduling. He had a gift for arranging things into an order that made political sense and caused me the least possible irritation, which in 11 years of working together had become one of the foundational conditions of my ability to function. The day had begun at first light. I dressed with the help of my chamberlain, a precise man named Aldrich who had been performing this service for 12 years and had learned to do it in near silence, which I appreciated. The formal robes of an alpha king on a ceremony day are considerable. The weight of the wolf fur collar alone is enough to make your shoulders remember they are doing something important, which is presumably the design intention. I wore the iron circlet rather than the full crown. This was a submission ceremony, not a coronation, and the full crown at a submission ceremony was the kind of excess that insulted the intelligence of everyone present. Lord Dre has confirmed the attendance of all 43 pack lords, Aldrich said, adjusting the collar's clasp. The graving submission is scheduled 3rd. Yes, I said. The graven pack. I had thought about the graven pack submission the previous evening, after Dre's briefing, more than I had thought about any of the other arrangements. Not because of Graven itself, which was a small territory in the southwest of Ashenvale's reach, historically compliant and unremarkable, because of what Graven had sent. She will stand as a submission token, Dre had said, setting the parchment down with his particular quality of controlled neutrality. Wolfless, 24 years old, no pack affiliation, born within Graven's territory. I had read the parchment. The woman's situation had been described in the most minimal administrative language. She was available, adult, consenting, legally compliant. There was nothing cruel in the language, which meant there was no malice behind it, only the grinding indifference of a minor pack that had been asked for a token it couldn't easily supply and had found the nearest available solution. I had not commented to Dre. There was nothing productive to comment on. The submission requirement was fulfilled, the form was correct, the woman had agreed to come. There were no grounds for objection under Ashenvale law, which was perhaps the relevant irritation, that there were no grounds for objection, and that this was the kind of situation Ashenvale law had not particularly considered. I had thought about it through the evening. Then I had set it aside, as I set aside everything I cannot change before the event that must be gotten through. The morning had been bright, the kind of northern autumn bright that has no warmth in it and therefore no mercy, but has a great deal of clarity. I had walked through the Citadel's east corridor to the Hall of Oaths at the correct time, spoken with Dre about the order of proceedings, confirmed the placement of the pack lords in the tiered benches, and taken my position at the top of the dais. The hall filled. The candles burned. The stone was cold through the soles of my boots in the particular way that Ashenvale stone is always cold, not unpleasant, simply old, retaining the temperature of centuries rather than the temperature of rooms. The first pack submission was the Coldwater Pack's, and it was as it should have been. Fenric of Coldwater was a man of genuine quality, 20 years of careful loyalty, a territorial lord who had built Ashenvale's coastal relationships through patience and precision, and never once required managing in a crisis. His daughter was 22, and had inherited his composure along with whatever she had developed in addition to it, a steadiness of a kind that I noted with appropriate attention. She was an excellent candidate. The formal portions of her presentation were impeccable. The bond did not stir for her, which was not unusual. Sometimes the bond needs time, or proximity, or a quality of quiet that a ceremony hall full of pack lords and burning candles cannot easily provide. She was not my fated mate. I did not believe that with any certainty in the moment. I simply noted that nothing had moved and set it aside. The Greyford pack came second. I managed my attention through Lord Dunning of Greyford's submission with the practiced patience of a man who has conducted 11 years of these proceedings, and has long since learned to distinguish between the important and the merely necessary. Greyford's gift was a set of territorial boundary concessions in the river districts, well-prepared documents that Dre received with appropriate gravity. The presentation concluded. Lord Dunning stepped back into his place in the benches. Then graving. I watched them enter from the side passage to the left of the dais. Packlord Combe of Graving was a broad-shouldered man, with the look of someone who has spent years being physically imposing in rooms where that quality is not especially useful. He was nervous, and managing it with the concentrated effort of a man who has decided that you cannot tell he is nervous if he simply holds his chin high enough and his shoulders square enough. It was almost working. Behind him, 2 witnesses. And then, 3 steps behind the witnesses, the woman. She was simply present. That is the word that comes back to me when I think about that moment, and I know it is not quite sufficient to carry the full weight of what I mean by it, but it is the truest word I have. She walked into the Hall of Oaths and she was simply there. The way a candle is simply lit in a dark room, not demanding attention, not deflecting it, simply burning. She wore a dress of gray wool, the kind that speaks of good care rather than fine weaving. Clean lines, good drape, no ornament. Her hair was dark and pinned without fuss. Her face was composed in the particular way of a person who has decided how they are going to stand in a difficult room before they entered it, and having made that decision, has set it down and no longer needs to carry it. She was not performing courage. My wolf, who had been entirely indifferent through 3 hours of ceremony, who had, if I am being accurate, been entirely indifferent through approximately the last 18 months in a general way that I had noticed, but chosen not to examine, went still. Not the howl behind the ribs the old songs describe, not the pull in the chest like a rope drawn taut, something smaller and older than either of those. The way a room goes still when a door opens and the wind comes in from a direction you did not expect. A reorientation. Something pausing to pay attention, with the deliberateness of a creature that does not waste attention. I was watching her. I noted that I was watching her the way one notes an irregularity in a familiar ledger, without judgment, with precise attention, with the understanding that something has changed. The pack lords in the tiered benches did not share my attentiveness. By the 3rd submission of a ceremony day, the drift had set in, the particular quality of people who are present in the technical sense while their minds arrange themselves elsewhere, waiting for the portion of the proceedings that actually concerns them to resume. I could feel it in the room the way I always could, not with contempt, simply with awareness. This was the nature of ceremonies that ran long. 2 of the lords in the upper benches were having a quiet exchange, which they believed was inaudible and was not. One was saying something about the Coldwater girl. The other was responding in the abbreviated language of men who have discussed these matters many times and no longer require full sentences. I let the sound wash by without giving it more attention than it deserved. Senna, I did not yet know her name. She was still, in the administrative sense, graven submission token, did not look at the benches. She did not look at me. She was looking at the floor of the hall and specifically at the iron seal 3 feet in front of her boots. There was something almost attentive about it. The way you look at a thing that has caught your peripheral notice, and you are still deciding whether to give it your full regard. She gave it her full regard. My wolf made a sound I have never found an adequate word for. Not a howl and not a growl. Something much smaller and more ancient than either. The sound a fire makes when it finds the last pocket of air in a log and takes hold. Colm stepped forward and delivered his pack submission. He performed the required gestures, spoke the required words, presented the documentation to Dre without dropping it, which I could see was costing him some concentration. He named the woman Senna, he said, of Graven Village, as his pack's goodwill token, as the letter of the submission requirement required. She was named and she stood where she had been placed and she continued to look at the seal. The submission protocol required a final gesture. The token was to step forward and stand before the seal in acknowledgement. It was purely formal. The seal was a floor ornament, a historical artifact, an object of aesthetic and administrative significance and no active function. In 400 years, this gesture had been performed perhaps several thousand times. No one had ever done anything except stand before it for a moment and step away. She stepped forward. She stood before the seal. For a moment, a fraction of one, really, less time than it takes a breath to complete itself, nothing happened. The hall continued in its late afternoon drift. Somewhere in the back benches, someone shifted their weight. The candles burned steadily. Then the seal lit. Not gradually, not with the slow build of something waking from a long sleep. It went from cold dark metal to brilliantly, entirely alive in less time than it takes to blink, and the light it gave was not fire. It was not moonlight or candle glow or any of the warm, familiar kinds of light that the hall already contained. It was older than any of those. It was the particular light of a thing doing the thing it was made to do, after a very long time of waiting to do it. The wolf script around the seal's edge began to move. I was on my feet. I had not decided to stand. The motion simply occurred, the way instinct occurs below the level of decision, driven by something that knew what was happening before my conscious mind had caught up with it. My chair was behind me. The candles in the hall were unchanged. The light from the seal was rising through the floor like a tide. The hall went silent. It went silent in the way a room only goes silent when everyone in it has encountered something for which no one has a prepared response, because their accumulated experience did not suggest they would need one. 43 pack lords and their seconds and witnesses, and Dre to my left, and the guard at their posts, and Colm of Graving with his expression in the process of completely reorganizing itself. All of them motionless, all of them looking at the floor. The wolf script moved, and where it moved it left itself raised in lines of cold, clear light, and the inscription it was writing. The inscription that had been sealed into the iron 400 years ago by the founding council, by my ancestor's ancestor, by men who had believed that bloodlines needed witnesses made of metal because men could be bought, and metal could not read, in the old tongue that I had been taught from books that treated it as a dead language. The blood of the founding moon, the first made bond, the mate unreachable by time. She was reading it. She had not stepped back. She had not made any sound. Her hands were at her sides, entirely still, and her face, as she read the inscription that was writing itself in light at her feet, had the quality of a person who is receiving information they recognize without being able to account for the recognition. Not shock. Something more internal than shock, the particular expression of comprehension arriving in a moment when you had not prepared to comprehend. I came down from the dais. 3 steps, on stone that made a sound in the silence. I was aware of the hall around me, the 43 pairs of eyes, Dre's absolute stillness. The way calm had gone a particular shade that I associated with men who have recently understood that a thing they have done is much more significant than they intended. I was aware of all of it, and it was, at a significant remove, the way a landscape seen from a great height is real but not immediate. The wolf script completed its circuit. The seal's outermost ring blank metal for 4 centuries, unwritten, empty of everything but waiting, filled in a final sweep of light, letter by letter in the old tongue, reading all the way around. Found. The hall breathed out. A collective exhalation that was not a sound exactly, but was the physical result of 43 people remembering to use their lungs again. And then the murmur started, low, uncertain, searching for words, the way murmurs always begin in a room full of people who have witnessed something they have no ready vocabulary for. She looked up from the seal as I reached the edge of it. Dark eyes, very direct. She did not step back from me. There was no fear in her face and no performance of courage and no calculation. She was simply looking at me with the same quality of attention she had been giving the seal, open, full, entirely her own. "What is your name?" I said. My voice came out below the register of ceremony, lower and more direct than the hall required. "Senna," she said. "Of Graven Village." "You have no wolf." "No." "You knew this seal." She considered this with the brief pause of someone choosing precision. "I didn't know it. I recognized it. I'm not certain those are the same thing." "How old are you?" 24. "And Graven brought you here as a submission token." I said it plainly, naming the thing. She held my gaze without flinching. "Yes." Because they believed that was the least they could offer and remain compliant. A pause. "I believe that's correct." There was a quality to her voice that I have been trying to find adequate words for since that morning, and have not entirely succeeded in finding. Evenness. Not flatness. There is a warmth underneath it, a warmth that has nothing to do with softness. That is simply the warmth of a person who is entirely present and not performing a version of themselves for an audience. She acknowledged the humiliation with the directness of someone who has already made peace with the facts and does not require sympathy to hold it. "Do you know what the inscription says?" I asked. She looked down at the seal once more, reading, then back at me. "The blood of the founding moon, the first made bond, the mate unreachable by time." She said it carefully, not performing the recitation but being precise. "And found along the outer ring." Your translation is accurate. My grandmother taught me the old tongue. A pause. She said it was important to know. She never told me why. The seal's light had not dimmed. It was holding its clarity with the patience of a thing that has been waiting 400 years and is in no hurry now that it has done what it came to do. "I'm going to ask you a question," I said, "and I want you to answer it honestly, without any consideration of what the appropriate answer might be." She waited, giving me her full attention. "Do you wish to leave?" The hall was very quiet. Behind me, I was aware of the 43 pack lords in their benches in various states of stillness, of Dre standing with the controlled non-expression that meant he was attending to every word, of Comb of Graving in the position of a man who is realizing that the ripple effects of his morning's decisions extend considerably further than he anticipated. "Is that a real choice?" she said. "It is the most real I have to offer you. The seal is a record, not a command. It has no authority over your person. If you wish to leave Ashenvale to return to Graving or to go wherever you choose, I will see it done, and there will be no consequence to you of any kind." She looked at me for a long time. "You mean that?" she said. "I never say things I don't mean in the Hall of Oaths. It would seem impolite to the architecture." Something moved across her face, not a smile exactly, but the precursor to one, the territory where surprise and something like relief meet before they decide what they are. She looked at the seal, then back at me. "No," she said, "I don't wish to leave." And that was the beginning of it. The rest of the ceremony day required management of a practical kind. Dre had the hall cleared within 12 minutes, the pack lords to the antechamber, the documentation to the records office, comb of graving to a small waiting room off the corridor, with the courtesy that his situation deserved and the privacy that the moment required. Senna stood where she had been standing, beside the seal, which had dimmed to a steady, low gleam rather than returning to cold silence, and watched the proceedings with the attentiveness of someone who finds logistics interesting rather than alarming. Dre approached me when the hall held only the guard and the three of us. "The eastern guest quarters," he said quietly. "Shall I have them prepared?" "Yes," I said, and then, because I was aware that Senna was within earshot and had not been asked, "If that's acceptable." She looked at me. "You're asking me," she said. "I am. The Alpha King of Ashenvale is asking me where I'd prefer to sleep." "I realize it's an unusual sentence," I said, "but yes." Her expression settled into a consideration. The seal's light at her feet held steady. "The eastern quarters would be fine, thank you." Dre's face made no expression whatsoever, which was his way of indicating that he found something remarkable. I sought a comb of graving before he was released. I found him in the side room, a small, stone-walled space with 2 chairs and a window that looked onto the courtyard, sitting forward with his elbows on his knees and the expression of a man who has been revising his understanding of his own mourning. He stood when I entered, "My lord." "Sit down, Combe." I sat across from him. "You're not in difficulty. I want to be clear about that before anything else." He sat. The relief was visible and immediate, which made me think more of him rather than less. "I didn't know," he said. "About the seal, about any of it. She's from the village, her parents are gone, she's kept accounts for us for 6 years. She said she'd never seen the Citadel." He stopped. "I needed a token. She agreed to come. I thought it was—" He stopped again. "You thought it was a minor administrative matter," I said. "Yes," he said quietly. "It was a minor administrative matter right up until it wasn't," I said. "I don't fault you for working with the information you had. What I'd like you to carry away from this is a sharper consideration of how the people in your territory are situated when you make requests of them." He was quiet then. "Yes, my lord." "Graven submission documentation is accepted," I said. "Your pact standing with Ashenvale is unchanged. You'll receive written confirmation from the records office." I paused. "And if it matters to you, the woman was brought here in a capacity that was below what she deserves. That will be corrected." He looked at me with the expression of someone who has more to say, and is not certain whether he should say it. "She's good," he said finally. "She's always been good. She knows things. She looks at a problem until she understands it." He paused. "I think I knew that, and I offered her anyway because I didn't have anything else available." He met my eyes. "I'm sorry for that." "Good," I said. "Tell her that, not me." He nodded. I left him there. He would have the opportunity, I would make certain of that. But first Senna needed the afternoon, and I needed to spend it managing the administrative consequences of the most significant thing that had happened in Ashenvale in 400 years. Dre had already begun. By the time I reached my study, he had a preliminary list of communications that needed composing, to the pack lords who had witnessed the activation, to the archivists, to the council members who had not been present, to the records office, to the relevant legal officers who would need to provide formal documentation of the activation for the bonding register. The list was 12 items long, and all 12 were necessary. "The Lord Fenwick will want a private audience," Dre said. "Tomorrow morning," I said, "and Lord Aravold as well." "Schedule them back to back." separately or together? I considered. Fenwick would want to process the historical implications with care and take his time about it. Aravold would want to raise his objections cleanly and get a straight answer. Separately, I said. Aravold first. Yes, my lord, Dre made the note. And the candidate, Lord Fenwick of Coldwater, has a daughter who was prepared as the primary bonding candidate. I'll write to Fenwick myself. Dre looked at me with his controlled expression. That's appropriately direct, he said, which was his way of saying that it was the right thing to do, and he hadn't suggested it only because he had expected I would think of it myself. I wrote to Fenwick that evening, after the administrative work was done. I told him the seal had activated. I told him his daughter had conducted herself with great dignity, and that he should be proud of her. I told him I hoped this would not damage the relationship between Coldwater and Ashenvale, which it would not, because Fenwick was the kind of man who understood that destiny and disappointment can coexist without the disappointment winning. I told him I intended to find a way to honor Coldwater's goodwill through other means, and that I meant this concretely rather than diplomatically. He wrote back in 2 days. My lord, the seal speaks and we listen. 4 words after the salutation. That was Fenwick entire. The afternoon I had given Senna she spent in the eastern garden, as I learned the following morning from Mara, who managed the domestic staff of the eastern wing, with the thoroughness of a person who takes their work seriously, and the subtlety of a person who knows the difference between useful information and gossip. She told me Senna had walked the length of the garden twice, examined the plantings in the herb beds with close attention, sat on the bench by the winter roses for approximately an hour, then asked if there were other gardens. There were. She had been shown them and had made notes. The kind of notes, Mara described carefully, that a person makes when they are comparing and assessing rather than simply recording. Then she had asked for paper and a pen. Give her whatever she needs, I said. The paper, I learned at dinner that evening, was for letters. Specifically for a letter to her neighbor in Graving, a woman of 72 named Tessin who was looking after Senna's herb garden in her absence, and who needed to know that the absence would be longer than originally planned. This was the first fact I learned about Senna that had nothing to do with the seal or the ceremony or the bloodline. That her first act of planning, when her life changed in the way it had changed that morning, was to write a letter home about her herb garden. What does it need? I said. She looked at me with mild interest at the question. The winter sage wants cutting. The time is fine. The lavender should be left alone until March. She reached for her bread. Tessin knows most of it. She's been in and out of my yard for 30 years. I just wanted to tell her myself. We ate dinner. It was the first of what would become a habitual arrangement, small dining room, candlelight, a working quiet between the formal and the personal that I had not previously known was possible in a dinner, and that I had, by the following Tuesday, come to look forward to as the clearest part of my day. I learned more about her by degrees. She had grown up in Graving, born there and stayed. Her parents had died when she was 9, first her father and then her mother within a year, and a neighbor, Tessin's predecessor, as her nearest person. A woman named Bree had raised her with uncomplicated steadiness that she had apparently absorbed. She had not felt the absence of a wolf in the way the world seemed to expect. It's like being told you're missing something you never had, she said. I don't feel a gap. I just feel like myself. She had worked in the mill until she was 18, then learned accounts from the village secretary, then taken over the accounts for the Graven Hall when the secretary retired. She was better at accounts than the secretary had been, she said, without apology or false modesty, because she was accurate and the secretary had been approximate. An approximation in accounts causes problems that accuracy does not. She asked at the end of the first dinner whether it was all right to use the library. Of course, I said. I don't want to be in the way. There's a reading room off the north alcove, I said. It's almost never used except during the summer records review. I'll have a key made for you. The look she gave me at this, contained, but containing something behind it that was recognizably pleasure, the particular pleasure of someone who has been offered exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, and is calibrating how to receive it without overstating, was one I would learn to watch for. There are 12 texts on the founding moon bloodline, I added. Third shelf of the east cabinet. I thought you might want to find them. I've thought about nothing else, she said. Lord Werewolf came for his private audience the following morning. He was a tall man with a horizontal quality to his skepticism. He distributed it broadly rather than directing it at any particular thing, which meant he was equally suspicious of arguments he wanted to believe as arguments he didn't. I had respected this about him for 11 years. He sat across from me and said, without preliminary, I was going to question the seal's activation. I want you to know that before I say anything else. I assumed, I said. I've changed my mind. He paused, gathering his next words with the care of a man who wants to be precise. I've been thinking about the outer inscription. Found, not recognized or presented or confirmed, found, present tense. The seal used the present tense. He looked at me. I don't know what to do with the theological implications of that, but I know what the word means. As do I said. You have 40 witnesses who saw what I saw, he said, and a seal that hasn't moved in 4 centuries. He gathered his papers, the motion of a man who has arrived at a conclusion and is organizing the paperwork of it. I'll be supporting the formal ratification at council. If it matters, you have my word on it before I leave this room. It mattered. Werewolf's word in a council chamber was worth more than the formal votes of 5 lesser lords combined, because he was known to disagree with me when he thought I was wrong, and to say so plainly, which made his agreement mean something it wouldn't mean from a more compliant man. Thank you, I said. Fenwick came second. He was older than Werewolf by 15 years and had a relationship with patience that came from having lived long enough to see several things he had been told were impossible turn out to be merely rare. He sat down, folded his hands on the table and said, The 9th text has the most complete description of the seal's activation protocol. I reread it last night. Senna is working through the 12 texts, I said. She translated a portion of the 7th this morning. Fenwick looked at me with a quality of attention that meant he was reassessing something. She reads the old tongue. Her grandmother taught her. And her grandmother was a woman who chose to teach her granddaughter a dead language and mentioned that it was important, Fenwick said slowly, without elaborating. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Someone in that lineage knew, he said, what the bloodline was, and decided to prepare the girl without telling her why. He paused. That's a grandmother's love and a considerable amount of courage. I had not thought of it in precisely those terms. After he said it, I could not think of it in any other terms. The formal council ratification was scheduled for the end of the month. The days between the activation and the ratification were, in their way, the most ordinary days I had had in years, which is perhaps the wrong word for a period during which the most significant thing in Ashenvale's history in 4 centuries was being processed through the administrative and legal and archival machinery of a large packed kingdom. But I mean ordinary in the sense of inhabited, full of daily texture, not simply passing through me on their way to something else. Each morning I woke knowing she was in the East Wing. Each day had its structure, council, correspondence, territory administration, the 100 small decisions that compose the governance of 40,000 people. And within that structure there were the particular brightnesses that were, I came to understand her. The library key on the table each morning meaning she had been and gone before the citadel was fully awake, a report from Brennan about the herb beds, a note from Mara that Senna had inquired about the citadel's grain storage and whether there was a map of the granary system. She wants to see the granary map, Mara said. Show her, I said. She had questions about the cross-referencing system. Answer them. Mara paused. My lord, she already answered them herself. She wanted to tell me the answers. This was, in miniature, the pattern of Senna in the Citadel. She did not ask for information in order to be helped. She asked in order to cross-check what she had already worked out and to share the working out with someone. She was not the kind of person who sat with conclusions alone. She looked for someone to think alongside. In the library, that someone was increasingly me. By the end of the first week, I had been in the library with her 4 times, once by invitation and 3 times by the natural gravity of a man who finds himself routing his afternoon walk through the north alcove rather than the south corridor on no particular justification. She never commented on this. She simply looked up when I arrived, made a small sound of acknowledgement that had nothing of surprise in it, and returned to whatever she was reading. On the 4th day, I sat down at the reading table and worked through a dispatch while she went through the 7th text. An hour passed in a quiet that had the quality of a much longer and much more established quiet, comfortable, not self-conscious, the kind of quiet that 2 people only find together after they have been finding it for some time. I noticed this. I did not mention it. She said, without looking up, the 4th text says the bloodline is matrilineal. The 7th says it's carried through the first child regardless of gender. The 9th says these statements don't contradict each other because the original compact distinguished between bloodline and seal right. Do you know which interpretation is considered authoritative? The 9th, I said, by the current archivists. That's what I thought, she said. It has the most internal consistency. She turned a page. The 7th text has a translation problem, though. I want to look at the original. The original is in the restricted archive, I said. Below the hall, Orvith has the key. She looked up for the first time in an hour. Is that available to me? I'll arrange it, I said. She looked at me for a moment with the quality I was coming to recognize, assessing not whether I meant it but whether I understood what I was offering and had offered it deliberately rather than automatically. Apparently satisfied, she returned to the text. Thank you, she said. I arranged it. Orvith, the librarian, a meticulous man who had managed the Ashenvale archives for 15 years with a precision that bordered on reverence, received the request with the controlled expression of a man who is being asked to do something he is not entirely comfortable with, and is determining whether the authority behind the request is sufficient to override his discomfort. The restricted archive, he said. Yes. The original 7th text is, the parchment is 400 years old. She won't damage it, I said. She reads the old tongue. A pause. She reads the old tongue, he repeated. Her grandmother taught her. He thought about this for a moment with the concentration of a man recalibrating a significant variable. I'll accompany her, he said. They spent 3 hours in the restricted archive. I received this information from Dre with his usual economy and no editorial comment. At dinner that evening, Senna told me, the original 7th text confirmed what she had suspected. The translation error was in the 3rd line, which should have read the first bond recognized, rather than the first child born. The error had propagated through every subsequent copy of the text for 400 years. She had made notes on the correct reading, in the old tongue, and in the modern language side by side, and left them with Orvith for the archivists to review. What did Orvith say? I said. He said I was right, she said. Then he was quiet for a while. Then he asked if I'd look at the 8th text as well. She looked at her soup. I said yes. By the end of the 2nd week, she was in the restricted archive every other day. Orvith had stopped accompanying her. He had started leaving notes on her reading table instead, in the careful hand of a man who is not used to having a research equal and is finding the experience simultaneously challenging and satisfying. The Citadel's domestic staff, Mara, Gareth, Brennan, Aldrich, had made their individual assessments of her in their individual ways, and arrived at their individual versions of the same conclusion, which I learned primarily through the quality of their reports to me. Mara reported her activities with a careful neutrality that meant she found them entirely reasonable. Gareth reported the conversation about sage preservation with the proprietary pride of a person who has been shown something useful. Brennan said she knew about winter herbs, and then looked at me as though this were a statement about something larger than winter herbs, which it was. I found her in the garden at the end of the second week. It was a cold afternoon, the light going early, the kind of November light that has no mercy but has clarity. She was at the south end of the herb beds, examining a rosemary plant with the focused attention of someone who has decided it needs something and is working out what. "The rosemary wants cutting," she said, without looking up, which meant she had heard my footsteps and chosen not to interrupt what she was doing in order to respond to them. I found this, unreasonably perhaps, rather satisfying. "So Brennan tells me," I said. "He hasn't gotten to this section yet. He's careful with everything else." She looked up. "Can I?" "Yes," I said. She cut the rosemary with no wasted motion, no performance, simply the precise action required. I watched her. "The gardens at Graven are smaller," she said, working. I assumed. "But the same plants mostly, same latitude." She examined what she'd cut, assessed it, moved to the next section. "The sage here is the same variety as the one I grow at home. I recognized the leaf shape." "You recognized a plant the way you recognized the seal," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Not quite the same," she said. "The plant I recognized because I've grown it. The seal I recognized because—" She stopped. "I don't know, because something in me knew it before I did." She set down the pruning tool and looked at me. "That's happened twice in my life, with the seal and with you." I was still. She looked at me with the directness she brought to everything, and there was in her face no performance of the significance of what she had just said. She had simply said it, the way she said everything, because it was the accurate thing to say. "And how do you feel about that?" I said. "Still thinking about it," she said, and she picked up the pruning tool and went back to work. That was November. The December that followed was the month of establishing. The formal council ratification took place on the 28th, in the Hall of Oaths, with the seal's steady glow in the floor and 43 pack lords, and the additional witnesses, and Dre reading the declaration in his ceremonial voice. Slightly deeper than his ordinary voice, twice as precise, and Senna listening to it with the quality of someone who is receiving something large and making internal room for it before deciding what to do with it. When Dre finished, she said, in a voice pitched for me and not for the hall, "That's quite a number of official words." "It is," I said. "I apologize." "Don't they mean it? That matters more than how many words they use." They meant it. Lord Aravold was in the front row with the expression of a man watching something prove itself. Fenwick, beside him, had the look of a man who has lived long enough to see something he thought he might not live to see. Combe of Graven, in the back row, he had been invited personally, and he had come, which I had thought was the right kind of courage, was watching Senna with the expression of genuine relief, the kind that has more to do with another person's situation than your own. The pack lords placed their hands over their hearts and bent their heads, the traditional gesture of acknowledgement, and it moved through the room like a wave, 43 people choosing to mean the same thing at the same moment, and the seal in the floor glowed a fraction warmer as though it, too, was glad to have the matter official. I covered her hand with mine, a small thing, the right thing. She looked at our hands and then up at me. "Not how I plan to spend this autumn," she said. "Nor I said. "Better," she said. The months after the ratification were the months of building, which is what the stories leave out, because the stories want a ceremony, and then an ending, and the building is the thing between the two that makes the ending true rather than merely convenient. We built it in the library, in the Tuesday afternoons that had become Tuesday and Thursday, and occasionally the Friday morning when neither of us had anything pressing early, because Senna and Orvith were working on a re-indexing project that was taking more time than estimated, and that both of them seemed to be finding deeply satisfying in a way that had stopped having anything to do with deadlines. We built it in the small dining room in the evenings, in the dinners that had stopped being formal without either of us announcing they had stopped being formal. We built it in the garden, which was undergoing its winter quiet, and in Gareth's kitchen, where Senna continued to have opinions about the sage that Gareth continued to develop opinions about, with the result that the Citadel's winter herb stores were measurably improved by January, and in the stables, where Senna moved among the horses with the quiet that they found restful, and where I once heard her tell the gray mare something in the old tongue that made the mare exhale and settle her weight in the particular way of a creature that has been told exactly what it needed to hear. "What did you say?" I asked. "I told her she was fine," Senna said. "She just wanted to hear it." We built it in conversations that were not about the seal, or the bloodline, or the ceremony. Conversations about the Eastern water rights dispute, which Senna had opinions about after reading the relevant charter sections in the archive, about the deterioration of the North Road, which affected Graven's access to the market towns, about the agricultural texts in the Third Cabinet, several of which she had flagged as containing significant errors that had apparently gone uncorrected for decades, about her grandmother, Rian, who came up gradually and with increasing fullness over the weeks, a woman who had known something, Senna believed, and had chosen to prepare rather than explain. She trusted the timing, Senna said one evening. We were in the library, which had become our habitual Tuesday evening place as well as the afternoon. The candles were lit against the early dark, and the first real snow of the season was falling past the window. She knew something would happen, and that I would need to be ready for it, and she trusted that the readiness was what she could give me rather than the foreknowledge. "And were you ready?" I said. She looked at the window for a moment. "I was myself," she said, "which turns out to have been enough." I thought about this for several days. I continued to think about it intermittently for the rest of that winter, because it had the quality of a truth that accumulates rather than diminishes the more you hold it. In January, she reorganized the third and fourth cabinets of the library. Orvith, who had managed the library for 15 years and had views about its organization, came to tell me about this with the expression of a man who has been surprised by an improvement he resents having to acknowledge. "She's not wrong," he said. "No," I said, "she rarely is." He thought about this. "She'd like to rework the second cabinet as well." "Let her," I said. He came back an hour later. "She's doing the second cabinet," he said. "Good," I said. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has made his peace with something that surprised him by being better than he expected. "Yes, my lord," he said. And then, 2 weeks later, without any further report to me, he and Senna were seen in the north alcove completing each other's sentences about the drainage class filing system, and after that the library's organization improved steadily, and I stopped receiving any reports about it at all because there was nothing to report. February was the month I stopped managing the distance. Not abruptly. Senna did not do anything abruptly, and I had been learning since November that the pace at which she did things was calibrated by a genuine internal rhythm rather than by external expectation, and that this rhythm, if you were patient with it, was also right. It happened in the library on a Tuesday morning when the snow outside was the deep, permanent kind of winter snow that has stopped being a weather event and become simply the condition of the season. She was at the fourth cabinet and I was at the reading table, and she said, without looking up, "My grandmother would have loved this library." "Tell me about her," I said. She told me. An hour. The grandmother Rien, who had come to Graven from somewhere further east that she never named, who had a quality of knowing more than she said but never for dishonest reasons, always because she was waiting for the right moment, who had raised Senna after Bree got old and could no longer do it, or rather who had been part of raising her alongside the larger village, and who had made certain specific choices about what to teach her. The old tongue, the patience with timing, the habit of seeing things as they were rather than as you wished them to be. Who had died at 81 saying she had lived long enough to see what she needed to see. She saw that you were going to be all right, I said. She saw that I was going to find my way, Senna said. She was looking at the cabinet but not reading it. She never told me where. She just made sure I'd be able to recognize it when I got there. And do you, I said, recognize it? She was quiet for a long moment. The snow fell past the window. The library was very warm. Yes, she said. She did not look at me. She continued to look at the cabinet. But something in the quality of the room had changed, some quality of the air, of the silence, of the way the candlelight fell on the shelves. And I knew, in the way my wolf had known things since November with a certainty that was neither anxious nor urgent, simply present, that the distance I had been maintaining with careful deliberateness since the Hall of Oaths was no longer serving the purpose for which I had maintained it. I crossed the space between the reading table and the fourth cabinet. I took her hands. She looked up at me. You've been managing the distance, she said. Yes, I said. Since the second week. Yes. I was doing the same, she said. In the other direction, making sure I wasn't moving toward you too fast and leaving you without the room to be certain. She looked at our joined hands. I thought you should have the space to be sure. I was sure quickly, I said. So was I, she said, quickly. The seal in the floor below the hall was, at that moment, as far as I later learned from Orvith, who had been in the restricted archive at the time, glowing with a warmth that it had not produced since the activation day. He had no explanation for this that he could account for archivally, and he noted it only as an observation. We stood in the library with our hands joined. Inhabit, she said quietly. The word from the old tongue, from the text she had been the first to read correctly. Yes, I said. Build, she said. Day by day. Yes, I said. She held my hands back. The spring ceremony was on the first clear day of April, which came as the best days do, without warning, after a week of rain, entirely itself. The kind of morning when you step into the courtyard, and the light is different and everything that was gray has turned its face toward the sun. Senna spent the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday before the ceremony in the garden with Brennan, preparing the beds for the spring planting she had been planning since December. I found her there on Thursday morning with her working gloves and the proprietary look of someone who has invested months in a project and is watching it come to fruition. The ceremony is Saturday, I said. I know, she said. The mint needs thinning. I helped her thin the mint. My wolf found this entirely correct. He had, since February, found most things entirely correct, in the way of a creature that has arrived somewhere it intended to arrive and has settled. The ceremony was smaller than it could have been. The seal's story had traveled. We could have filled the hall twice over with lords requesting the honor of witnessing. We chose 43 pack lords and the 12 additional witnesses in Fenwick and Dre and the Citadel's own people, Mara, Gareth, Brennan, Aldrich, Orvith, all of whom were technically not required to be present in the ceremonial sense, and were all of them present. And Combe of Graving, who had spoken privately with Senna at the end of January, and come away from that conversation with the look of a man who has been given more grace than he knew how to hold, who had asked permission to attend and been told by Senna that of course he should come. And Tessin, who had traveled from Graving with a cutting from Senna's home herb garden wrapped in wet cloth, and hadn't quite been able to look at Senna when she arrived without her face doing something, complicated that she was very firmly not going to call crying. The ceremony forms were spoken in the old tongue. Both of us. Senna's pronunciation was better than mine, and I told her so afterward, and she received this with the quiet pleasure of someone who was glad to be good at a thing. The seal during the ceremony shifted from its steady low gleam to something warmer, the quality of a hearthfire rather than a working light, the particular warmth of a thing that has done what it was made to do, and has been allowed to rest in the knowledge that it was done rightly. Afterward we went to the garden. That was where she wanted to be, and I had stopped making any distinction between what she wanted and what I wanted, because over the winter they had become largely the same thing. The April garden was fully alive. The winter roses long past, everything that Senna had planted in December and January, and nursed through the cold weeks come up bright and various and exactly as she had expected it would come up, because she had paid attention and done the work and trusted the timing. She stood among it all in the late afternoon light, and Brennan stood near her with the expression of a man who has worked beside someone with genuine knowledge and is satisfied with what they've made together, and Tessin sat on the bench by the south wall and pretended not to cry into the cutting she was still holding, which she had decided should go in the southeast corner. "It'll want the same position as it has at home," Senna said to Brennan. "Full morning sun, partial shade by noon. The stone wall will help with the heat." "Yes," Brennan said, in the tone of a man who already knew this and was confirming rather than learning. I stood beside her. "We need to expand the south bed," she said to me. "Brennan mentioned it," I said. "We discussed it Wednesday." She looked at the stone wall, measuring with her eyes. 6 feet east, I think. It'll give room for what Tessin brought and the lavender I want to put in. "Done," I said. She turned to look at me with that particular quality she had, the attention that was entirely present, not performing attentiveness but simply being it. "Thank you," she said. "For the south bed," I said. "For all of it," she said. The months that followed were the substance of it, the thing the stories skip between the seal and the ending, which is the part that makes the ending mean what it means. The Eastern water rights dispute was resolved in May, in the council chamber, and the resolution was substantially Senna's, developed over 3 weeks of archive work and 2 evenings of conversation in the library. She presented the relevant legal precedents to Fenwick, who looked at them with the expression of a man who has found a better argument than the one he was planning to use, and then presented them to the 3 lords involved, who reached agreement within the hour. Fenwick afterward said to me, with the economy of his highest approval, "She should be at every council." "You'll need to brief her on the precedents beforehand," I said. "Gladly," he said, and he did. In June, Orvith finished the new indexing system for the East Wing. He and Senna had a celebratory dinner in the restricted archive, which Mara organized with her usual thoroughness, and which apparently lasted until well after the Citadel's normal evening hours, which neither of them reported to me or apparently felt required reporting. Orvith looked considerably happier in July than he had in October, which I considered a meaningful outcome. In August, a letter arrived from Reen's village, the village further east that Senna's grandmother had come from, whose name Reen had never shared with Senna. Someone there had heard, through the spreading network of the seal's story, and had written to Senna. The letter was in the old tongue. It was from an old woman, a record keeper, who had known a woman named Reen 70 years ago and had thought she had gone away and taken her knowledge with her. She hadn't. She had given it to her granddaughter instead. Senna read the letter twice, slowly, with the quality of someone receiving something from a great distance. Then she set it down and looked at the garden through the library window for a long time. She knew, Senna said, all of it from the beginning. Yes, I said. She made her peace with not seeing it, she was quiet, and trusted that I would. She wrote back to the record keeper. They began a correspondence that has continued. The record keeper is 83. She has information about the founding moon lineage that no one in Ashenvale has seen, and she is sending it in sections. And Orvith is organizing it with the concentration of a man who is working on the most significant archival project of his life, and knows it. In September, the first lavender bloomed in the south bed. Senna cut a sprig of it and held it for a while with an expression I had seen only twice before. Once in the Hall of Oaths, when the seal was writing itself in light at her feet, and once in February in the library, when something in the room had shifted and we had both known it. The expression of recognizing something that was, improbably and exactly, what it was supposed to be. She gave me the sprig. I still have it. On the first evening of December, the anniversary, more or less, of when the small dining room had become our habitual place, we sat at the table after the kitchen had cleared and the candles were lit and the snow had started again outside, and she was looking at the candle the way she sometimes did when she was thinking about something, and I said, "What are you thinking?" She looked up. "I was thinking about the word inhabit," she said, "the one from the original text, the translation I did in February." She looked at the candle again. "I've been thinking that none of the 12 translations got it quite right. It's not live in. It's not quite build." "What is it?" I said. "It's closer to tend," she said. "To inhabit the way you tend a garden, actively, with attention. Something you don't finish, you just continue." The candle between us was very steady. "Every day," she said. "Every day," I said. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, the way I had covered hers in the Hall of Oaths, and looked at me with the full, unhurried attention that was the most characteristic thing about her. The thing I had noticed before I knew her name, the thing I would know her by for the rest of my life. The seal in the Hall of Oaths glowed on in the dark below the citadel, patient and warm, doing the thing it had been made to do. It had gotten that right. And so had we. In October, the second week after the activation, I had my first properly extended conversation with Senna about something that had nothing to do with the seal. It was an accident, in the sense that most valuable things are accidents. I had come to the library at an hour I did not usually come to the library, for no reason I could account for other than that I had finished the afternoon's dispatch early, and the study felt unusually quiet, and she was there at the reading table with 3 of the agriculture texts spread open around her, and her notes laid out beside them in a precise, unhurried arrangement that told me she had been there for some time. She looked up when I came in. "I'm not in the way," she said, not as a question. "You're not," I said. "What are you working on?" She looked at the texts. "The crop rotation records from the 2nd century of Ashenvale settlement," she said. "The ones in the 3rd cabinet south section." She paused. "The system they used for the river districts was better than the one in use now. I wanted to understand why it changed." I came and looked over her shoulder at the texts. The old records were in a hand I recognized, the secretary script of the early settlement period, abbreviated and dense. She had made a running translation in the margins of her notes. "It changed in the Graymist period," I said. "My great-great-grandfather's reign. There was a dispute with the Eastern lords about management rights, and the river district rotation system was one of the things that got renegotiated away." "For what?" "Grazing rights in the northern uplands." She considered this. "That's not a good trade." "No," I said, "it wasn't. The Eastern lords got considerably the better of it, but it was 40 years after the founding compact, and the kingdom was still fragile in certain respects. My ancestor chose stability over optimal policy." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the record. "He was probably right at the time," she said. "He was, the stability held. But the crop rotation never came back. No one proposed it." She made a small sound that was not quite agreement and not quite disagreement, the sound of someone setting aside an incomplete thought to return to it later. "The Eastern water rights dispute," she said. The one currently before the council. Yes. Do you know whether the original River District rotation agreements are referenced in the current disputes documents? Because if the Eastern Lord's current position depends partly on the Grey Mystera renegotiation terms, there's an argument that those terms were insufficiently compensated at the time, which means the current framework may have less standing than they believe. I looked at her. She was looking at the old record, her finger tracing a line of the Settlementera script. I'll ask Fenwick to pull the Gramus documents, I said. She nodded, still reading. The current rotation could probably be restored for the river districts by the spring planting if the legal standing is there. The soil notes in these records are consistent with current survey data. The conditions haven't changed that much. She was 24, and she had been in the Citadel for 12 days, and she had just identified a legal argument for a territorial dispute that had been pending before my council for 14 months. Where did you learn to read these records? I said. She looked up. The mill accounts were kept in the same format, she said. 2nd century script. The village secretary explained it. She returned to the text. Did you know the river districts used to produce a winter barley variety that's no longer cultivated? It's mentioned in the 2nd rotation record. It might have been more cold-hardy than the current varieties. I did not know that, I said. Someone should look into it, she said. It might still exist somewhere. I went back to my study and told Dre to add historical winter barley cultivars, river districts, to the agricultural research items pending. He noted it without comment and added it to the list. And 3 months later an inquiry through the farming territories turned up a surviving seed stock in a small holding near the Eastmere River, kept by an old farmer who had been growing it from his grandfather's stock, and had never mentioned it to anyone because no one had asked. But that came later. That October afternoon, I stood in the library doorway after she had returned to her reading, and I thought, I do not know what it is to govern alongside someone. I have governed with support, with Dre's practical intelligence, Fenwick's historical knowledge, the council's collective judgment. But alongside, the way you stand alongside a person rather than behind or in front, is a different thing. I thought she would be good at this. My wolf did not think anything in particular. He had already known. The 2nd week also brought the question of the North Road. Senna had asked Mara for a map of Ashenvale's territory, the full administrative map, not the ceremonial one, and had spent a morning with it in the garden, which was where she had taken it because the light was better outside. Brennan had found her there, and she had asked him about the quality of the northeast roads during the winter months, because she was thinking about Graven's access to the market towns and whether it was adequate. Brennan came to me that evening. The woman from Graven, he said, with the careful neutrality of a man delivering a message he is not certain was intended for him to deliver. She's been looking at the North Road sections on the territorial map. I know, I said. What did you tell her? That the northeast roads flood in the early thaw and stay impassable for 3 to 4 weeks every year. That 2 of the minor bridges were reinforced 4 years ago, but the northernmost one hasn't been touched since the Graymist period. He paused. She asked whether there was a current infrastructure assessment. There isn't, I said, not in the last 8 years. He nodded. Then, after a pause, she mentioned that Graven loses approximately 3 weeks of market access every spring because of the flooding. She said that, for a village that depends on the spring market for seed supply, 3 weeks of access loss is the difference between adequate and inadequate for several families. I had governed Ashenvale for 11 years. The North Road condition was on a list of infrastructure items that had been flagged as requiring attention since my 4th year, and had been consistently deprioritized by more urgent matters. It was not a secret that this was the case. It was simply the reality of governing large territories with finite resources, and the permanent competition of urgent over important. Senna had identified it and named it, and provided a specific consequence within 10 days of arriving. "Thank her for the observation," I said to Brennan, "and tell her I'll have the infrastructure list pulled." "Yes, my lord," he said, and then, with the expression of a man who has been carrying a secondary observation and has decided to deliver it. She also said the northernmost bridge could probably be repaired with local materials during the summer months, which would be more economical than the materials the last reinforcement project used. She had the cost estimates from the Graving Village repair projects and thought the principles applied. "Does she have the estimates with her?" I said. "She made me a copy." He handed me a folded sheet of paper. In Senna's precise, unhurried hand, with the old penny column format of the Graving Village accounts, was a cost analysis of a bridge repair project that was more coherent and more practical than anything my infrastructure officers had produced on the subject in 3 years. I had it on Dre's desk within the hour. Dre read it twice. Then he looked up at me with his controlled expression. "She's been here 12 days, he said. "I know," I said. 12 days, he said again, with the particular repetition he used when he wanted me to understand that he found something more significant than he had prepared to find it. "Yes, Dre," I said, "I know." He set the document down with the care of a man who has decided something is important. "I'll have the North Road Infrastructure Review reopened," he said. "Do that," I said. The third week, she asked about the Pack Council itself. She asked not directly, not may I attend the council, but sideways, the way she approached large things. She asked Fenwick, whom she had met at a formal dinner in the second week, and with whom she had discovered a mutual interest in the Settlementera records, whether the council's working documents were part of the General Archive or the Restricted Archive. Fenwick came to me to report this conversation with the expression of a man who is not certain whether he is delivering news or asking for guidance. "The General Archive," I said. "That's what I told her," Fenwick said. "She asked if she could access them." "Yes," I said. Fenwick looked at me. "Yes," I said again, "whatever she needs access to, give it to her. With the obvious exceptions." The exceptions were the security intelligence files and the personal communications of living lords, which had their own protocol. Everything else in Ashenvale's administrative record was, technically, governed by any credentialed researcher. We had simply not had very many credentialed researchers. Fenwick went away. He came back 3 days later. "She found the error in the Eastern Boundary Charter," he said. I looked up from the dispatch I was reading. "The one from the Graymist period," he said. She was reading through the Graymist documents after our conversation about the crop rotation, and she found a clause in the Eastern Boundary Charter that appears to have been mistranslated from the original compact. He set a page on my desk. "She's written it out. The current translation reads that the Eastern Lords hold grazing rights in perpetuity. The original Old Tongue text says, in continuity of use, which has a different legal meaning. In perpetuity implies ownership. In continuity of use implies ongoing occupancy which lapses if use is discontinued." I looked at the page. "The Eastern Lords have not grazed the northern uplands continuously," I said slowly. "There were 32 years between the Graymist period and the current settlement, where the northern uplands were documented as unused." 34 years, Fenwick said. I checked. The use was discontinued in year 12 of the Graymist reign, and not resumed until year 46. Which means the in continuity of use clause may have lapsed. Which means the basis for the current Eastern Lords' territorial claim in the uplands may be substantially weaker than they believe, Fenwick said. Which means the water rights dispute, which derives partly from the upland grazing claims, may have different underlying legal standing. I was quiet for a long moment. "How long has this charter been in the archive?" I said. Since the Greymist period, Fenwick said, approximately 380 years. And no one has found this. Fenwick looked at me with the expression of a man who is experiencing several complicated things simultaneously. No one was looking for it, he said. She was reading the Greymist documents to understand the crop rotation history. She wasn't looking for the boundary charter. She just noticed. Yes, I said. She mentioned it to me in passing, Fenwick said, as though it might be of minor interest. I had to tell her that it might be of somewhat more than minor interest. What did she say? She said, oh, and then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said she'd make a clean copy of the translation and the relevant original text for my review. He paused. She did, in under an hour, with footnotes. I looked at the page again. The footnotes were clear and precise and accurate. Tell her, I said, that the council will want to review this in full, and that I'd like to understand whether she sees any other charter anomalies of this kind in the Greymist documents. Fenwick looked at me with the expression of a man who has already anticipated this request and is glad it is being made. I've already asked her, he said. She said she'll need the full set of Greymist territorial documents, which is in the restricted archive. Give her the restricted archive access, I said. Fenwick nodded. He was on his way to the door when I said, Fenwick. He turned. She should be at every council meeting, I said. He was very still for a moment. Then, yes, my lord, he said. I think so too. She came to the council for the first time in November, on a Thursday when the agenda included the Eastern Water Rights Dispute, the North Road Infrastructure Review, and the Agricultural Productivity Reports for the winter quarter. She sat at the end of the table. I had had a chair placed there, with 3 pages of notes and the particular quality of attention she brought to a room, which was the quality of someone who is not performing presence but simply being present. The Eastern Lords' representatives looked at her once, assessed the situation in the way of people who are encountering something they had not prepared for and are choosing how to respond to it, and then looked at Fenwick, who looked at me, and I looked at the agenda. Item 1, I said. The Eastern Water Rights Dispute. The Eastern Lords' representative presented their position, which rested on the Greymist period boundary charter's perpetuity clause. He was thorough and practiced. When he finished, Fenwick presented the translation analysis. The representative looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. This is the original text, he said finally, not as a question. It is, Fenwick said. The translation error has been in the archive for 380 years. The representative was quiet. We'll need time to consult with our lord, he said. Of course, I said. We'll schedule the next session for 2 weeks. The water rights dispute was resolved 3 weeks later. The settlement was substantially better for Ashenvale's territories than the position we had been working toward before. The Eastern Lords were not pleased, but they were not unreasonable men, and the original text was the original text, and they had had it reviewed by their own scholars who had confirmed Senna's translation. After the council session that finalized the settlement, Dre found me in my study and said, with the economy he reserved for things he considered significant, she should be formally part of the council's working process. She will be, I said. He nodded, he turned to go, then he turned back. She's good for Ashenvale, he said. This was, from Dre, the highest possible assessment. In 11 years of working together, he had made it of exactly one other person. He had made it of me. In December, after the spring ceremony and the months of building and the water rights settlement and the North Road Infrastructure Review and the restricted archive project and the lavender in the south bed and the letter from the record keeper in Reen's village and all the ordinary texture of days that have found their shape, there was an evening in the small dining room when Senna told me about a dream she had had. She did not often tell me about her dreams. She was not, in general, a person who lived much in the interior landscape of sleep. She lived in the waking world with too much attention to find the dream world equally interesting. But she told me this one because it had something in it she wanted me to know. I dreamed about the seal, she said, before I came here. I looked at her. Not the actual seal, she said. I'd never seen it, but a shape like it, a circle, inlaid in a floor with writing around the edge. I dreamed about it twice. Both times I was standing in front of it and the writing was moving, but I couldn't read it. She paused. In the dream, I couldn't read the old tongue. I'd never learned it, and I stood in front of it and knew it was saying something and couldn't understand what. And then, I said. And then I woke up, she said. Both times, she was quiet. I didn't think about it much afterward. Dreams like that where you're trying to read something and can't, those are just frustration dreams. Everyone has them. But I said, but I think my grandmother made sure I could read it, for when the time came. She was looking at the candle. She didn't tell me what it was for. She just made certain I'd be ready for it when I needed to be. Her voice had a quality I had only heard in it a few times, not sadness exactly, but the texture of a particular kind of love, the love that looks backward towards someone who is no longer there to be thanked. She knew, I said. She knew enough, Senna said, and she trusted me with the rest. She looked up. I think that's the best kind of love, actually. The kind that trusts you with the rest. Outside the small dining room's window, the December snow was falling again, as it had been falling all month, steady and permanent, the kind of snow that is less weather and more season. Yes, I said. I didn't get to thank her, she said, for any of it. I knew she was doing something, teaching me those things, but I didn't know what I was being prepared for, so I couldn't thank her properly. I just learned what she taught me and trusted that she had reasons. She knew you trusted her, I said. That's what she was watching for at the end. Not gratitude, just that you were yourself and that was enough to carry what she was leaving you. Senna was quiet for a long time. How do you know that? She said finally. Because that's what you told me, I said. When I asked what you'd learned about me in the first 3 weeks, you said I was consistent, that I cared about the right distinctions, that Brennan spoke well of me. I paused. All of that is what a person says when they trust someone, not when they're impressed by them, when they trust them. She looked at me across the table. You were paying attention, she said. I've been paying attention since November, I said. I know, she said. I've noticed. We sat in the warm room. The candles burned between us. Outside, the snow fell on the seal and the library and the garden and the citadel's old stone, patient and steady, the way things are that have been exactly what they are for a very long time. She reached across the table. Her hand found mine. We stayed there for a while, in the quiet that was not silent, in the warmth that was not fire, in the ease that was not peace but was something better than peace. The deep structural rightness of a thing in the place it belongs, tending what it has been given to tend, building forward into the days that are still to come. Every day. The weeks between December's first evening and the spring ceremony were the months in which I began to understand what I had. I say it that way, what I had, knowing it is not quite right, because she was not a possession and I would not have wanted to possess her if she had been. What I mean is something different. The months in which I began to understand what was true, what was present in the daily texture of my life that had not been present before. The difference between a life that is governed and a life that is inhabited. I had governed well for 11 years. I know this not from pride but from evidence. The territory was stable, the disputes were managed, the infrastructure was maintained above the threshold of crisis, if not always above the threshold of optimal, and the people who lived within Ashenvale's reach were, by any reasonable measure, better off than they had been at the start of my reign. I had worked hard and thought carefully, and listened to good advisors, and made the best decisions available to me with the information I had. But I had not been present in my own life, in the way she was present in hers. She was present the way a good gardener is present in a garden, with attention to what is actually there, as opposed to what you wish were there or planned for or expected. Not passive. She was one of the least passive people I had ever met, but genuinely attentive, genuinely receptive, genuinely responsive to the actual texture of things rather than the map of them. I watched her learn the citadel. She learned it the way she learned everything, one thing at a time fully, without trying to see ahead of where she was. She learned the staff before she learned the administrative structure. She learned the garden before she learned the formal estate. She learned the kitchen and the stables and the restricted archive and the working council before she learned the ceremony rooms, which she had been in on the activation day, and then essentially never revisited except in the context of what had happened there. "You haven't gone back," I said to her once, late January in the library. We had been working in companionable silence for an hour, and the observation had arrived without particular intention. She knew what I meant, to the hall. "Yes." She thought about it. "I don't need to," she said. "I know what it showed me. Going back and standing in it again wouldn't add anything to what I know." "Some people would want to," I said, "to revisit it, to feel what they felt there." She looked at me with mild curiosity. "Is that what you'd want?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think I want to understand it better. Standing in it again might help." She considered this. "What do you want to understand?" "Why it waited 400 years. She was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet when something struck her as significant, and she was deciding how to engage with it. "I don't think that's the right question," she said. "I think the seal did what it was supposed to do when it was supposed to do it. Asking why it waited implies that the timing was an error or an anomaly. But what if the timing was the point?" 400 years, I said. 400 years in which the bloodline was what it was, being carried forward by women who didn't know why they were teaching their daughters the old tongue but knew it mattered. She looked at her text. "My grandmother was the 4th generation from the original holder of the bloodline, as far as I can tell from the record-keeper's letters. Each generation taught the next, and none of them saw the seal, and none of them knew when it would be needed. They just kept the thread." "And you're the end of the thread," I said. "I'm the middle of it," she said. She looked at me. "The thread goes forward from here, too." She held my gaze for a moment, then she went back to her text. I thought about this for the rest of the day and for several days after. The thread going forward. The ordinary texture of teaching a granddaughter a dead language and not explaining why. The trust embedded in that, the profound patience of it, the willingness to begin something you would not live to see completed, and to trust the thing itself to carry forward to its end. My mother had taught me the old tongue. I had not thought about it in those terms before. In February, I told her this. We were in the garden, the herb beds, which she had been checking through the winter with the attention of a person who knows what she planted and wants to verify that it is doing what she expected. It was a cold afternoon, but not brutally so, the kind of cold that is simply February rather than crisis. "My mother taught me the old tongue," I said. Senna looked at me with the particular quality she had for receiving information that was being offered for a reason, rather than simply as fact. "How old were you?" she said. 6, 7, I thought about it. She started when I was 6 and I was fluent by 8. She said it was a king's duty to understand the founding records. "And was it?" she said. "I've used it twice in formal context since I became king," I said. "Once in the ratification ceremony for a border compact, and once in the ceremony with you." I paused. "She died when I was 13. I thought for a long time that she had taught me for the border compact. It happened the year after she died, and I remember thinking that she had foreseen I would need it." Senna was very still, looking at the herb beds. "But you don't think that anymore," she said. "I think she taught me the old tongue because it mattered that I know it," I said. "In the same way your grandmother taught you, because the thread was ongoing and the reason would become clear when it was supposed to become clear. She was quiet for a moment. She would have liked my grandmother, she said. She would, I said. I think they would have understood each other. Senna knelt beside the herb beds, checking the soil around the winter sage. She had a precision about this checking. She was not doing it for ritual comfort but genuinely assessing, in the way a good gardener assesses, looking at actual color and texture in spring, not at what she expected to find. The sage is fine, she said. Brennan cut it right. He consulted you, I said. We consulted each other, she said. She sat back on her heels and looked at the bed. It's a good garden. It was a good garden before I got here. I've just added to it. You've improved it. Improved is a strong word. I've done some things that suit my preferences. Whether those are improvements depends on what you're using the garden for. She looked up at me. What do you use it for? Before November, occasionally walking through it, nothing systematic. She nodded. Then the improvements are real. A garden no one is seriously tending is just a maintained space. She stood, brushing the cold soil from her knees. What I've done is make it a garden that someone is actually in. She looked at me as she said this, and I do not know if she intended the parallel, but I felt it. The same thing she had done to the library, to the council, to the small dining room, to the territory's administrative machinery, to the long days of an alpha king who had been governing well without quite being in his own life. Yes, I said. It's better with people in it, she said simply, and she went back to the herb beds. March brought the first clear warm days, and with them a letter from Lord Dunning of Grayford that required immediate attention, a delegation from the coastal reaches that Werewolf had requested I receive in person, and the arrival of the spring administrative reports, which were this year substantially more coherent than usual because Senna had spent January quietly reorganizing the reporting format with Dre's assistance. She had not announced she was doing this. She had simply suggested to Dre, after reading 6 consecutive reports that seemed to be using different organizational systems, that a standardized template might reduce errors and review time. Dre had agreed immediately and quietly, and they had produced the template over the course of a week without telling anyone else, and the March reports arrived in the new format and were notably better than the February ones. You didn't tell me, I said to Dre. You had the coastal delegation, he said. You could have mentioned it after. He looked at me with his controlled expression. My lord, if I mentioned every useful thing she did without telling you, we'd need a separate meeting for it. This was Dre's highest register of approval. I had known him for 11 years, and I had heard it exactly twice. The first had been about me. Lord Dunning's letter concerned a territorial matter on Grayford's southern border that was, on the surface, a routine boundary question. Underneath it was a much more interesting question about water access during the dry seasons, which Fenwick identified when he read the letter and Senna confirmed, when she read the underlying documentation from the restricted archive. The southern border was set in the second generation of settlement, she said, at the council session convened to address it. The original boundary markers were placed by flood measurement rather than topographical survey, which means they shift with the river course. If the river has shifted, which these records suggest it has, by approximately 40 meters east in the last 120 years, the current boundary is different from the original recorded position. Lord Dunning's representative looked at her. I don't believe we've met, he said, not unkindly but with the precise tone of a man who is trying to understand who he is speaking to. Senna, she said, of graving. She did not add the rest because the rest was unnecessary for the purposes of the meeting. The seal, Werewolf said from across the table, without looking up from the map he was studying. You've heard of the seal. I have, Lord Dunning's representative said slowly. Good, Werewolf said. Then you'll understand why I suggest we take the boundary argument she's just made seriously, rather than waiting for it to be confirmed by someone with more formal credentials, which will simply take more time and arrive at the same answer. Dunning's representative looked at me. The calculation in the records can be verified, I said. It will take 2 weeks for a survey team to confirm the river shift measurement. In the meantime, I'd recommend we treat the preliminary analysis as working evidence. Yes, my lord, he said. He wrote to Dunning. Dunning's reply arrived in 8 days rather than 2 weeks, because Dunning was a man who preferred to get ahead of problems when possible. The survey team's measurement, when it came, confirmed the river shift within 2 meters of Senna's estimate. The boundary was adjusted. The water access question was resolved. Lord Dunning sent a personal note to me that contained a sentence, "I am glad to know she is at your table," that I read 3 times. April's ceremony was what I described. The thin, clear morning, the Hall of Oaths with its warm seal light, the 43 pack lords and the 12 witnesses and the Citadel's own people, and Comb of Graving in the back row and Tessin with her cutting and her handkerchief. The old tongue spoken by both of us, and the seal warming, and the garden afterward with the spring planting and the lavender and Brennan and Tessin and the good light. What I did not describe, because I was trying to describe the shape of things, is the moment before the ceremony. We were in the East Corridor, making our way to the Hall of Oaths. The corridor was in full spring morning light. She was in the deep green dress that Aldrich had brought from the Citadel's formal stores. She had taken one look at it and said it was very green, which was not an objection, and then put it on with no further comment, and she was right. It was very green, and she was also entirely right in it. We were walking side by side, as we had walked many corridors over the past months. She said, "I want you to know something before we go in." "All right," I said. "The seal found me," she said. "That's true, I believe it. I believe what the old texts say about the bloodline, and I believe what the seal's inscription said, and I believe the 9 months of evidence since October." She paused. "But the bond I have with you is not the seal's. It's mine. I chose it the way the 9th text says. I inhabited it the way we agreed." She looked at the corridor in front of us. "I wanted you to know that the distinction matters to me, not to be difficult, because I also believe they're the same thing ultimately, and that the seal found me precisely because I was the kind of person who would choose this deliberately." She was quiet for a moment. "But I want the choosing to be seen, not just the finding." I stopped walking. She stopped beside me. "I see it," I said. She looked at me. "I have seen it every day since the library in February," I said. "Since the bench by the winter roses, since the rosemary in November, since you told me you wanted to know me before you formed a view and then spent 4 months actually doing that." I paused. "You chose this. I know that. And I chose you, not what the seal said, but you, the specific person who reorganizes library archives and argues about crop rotation, and writes cost estimates for bridge repair and teaches Orvith how to file drainage classifications and writes letters home about herb gardens." Her face had the expression it had had twice before, the one I had no adequate word for, the territory between surprise and relief, and something that was simply being received. "Good," she said, "then we're agreed." "We're agreed," I said. We went into the Hall of Oaths. And after, in the garden in the south bed, in the lavender light of the first clear April afternoon, with Tessin on the bench and Brennan at the wall, and the old stone of the citadel rising over all of it, warm with its peculiar quality of permanence, she said. "I wrote to Tessin before I came. I told her I'd been asked to appear at the citadel and would be away for a week or 2. I told her the sage wanted cutting by a 1/3, not a half." "I remember," I said. "She's been waiting 30 years to move permanently to a house with a south-facing garden," Senna said. "Her current one faces north." "Is there a house with a south-facing garden available in Graving?" I said. There would be, she said, if the person currently occupying the house with the south-facing garden moved elsewhere. I looked at her. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I said. If you're thinking I'm suggesting that Tessin should have my house, she said, then yes. She looked at the south bed. I'm not going back to it, she should have it. You're giving your house to your neighbor. She's cared for my garden for 6 months, and she's been waiting 30 years for a south-facing garden, Senna said. It seems like the right use for a house I'm not using. I thought about Fenwick, who would have a formal opinion about the property protocols. I thought about Dre, who would manage the relevant documentation with characteristic efficiency. I thought about Tessin, currently sitting on the bench 12 feet away, who was trying to contain her emotions with the limited success of a woman for whom this day had already been considerably more than she had prepared for. Dre will need to arrange the paperwork, I said. I assumed, she said, and she looked at Tessin. Tessin, she said. Tessin looked up from the bench, red-eyed and determined not to be red-eyed. The house is yours, Senna said, if you want it. Tessin pressed her mouth into a line that was trying to be controlled and wasn't. You don't have to. I know, Senna said. Do you want it or not? Yes, Tessin said. Good, Senna said. Dre will send the documents. She looked at the east corner of the south bed. The lavender is going to want a bit more shelter from the north wind than this wall gives it. Brennan, what do you think about a low screen hedge along the north side? Brennan considered. Wind bush, he said. It'll do double duty, shelter, and a wind barrier for the bee yard if we put one in the spring. A bee yard, Senna said. With the particular quality of pleased attention she had for ideas that connected multiple things simultaneously. If you wanted one, Brennan said carefully. I very much want one, she said. They talked about the bee yard for the rest of the afternoon. I listened. My wolf sat back in the way he had been sitting back since February, settled, entire, simply present. And the light moved over the garden and the citadel and the south bed lavender and the bench where Tessin was drying her eyes with her handkerchief. And the April afternoon was what it was. Ordinary, warm, everything exactly where it belonged. The seal below us in the Hall of Oaths held its warm light. It had waited 400 years for this. It seemed content to go on from here quietly. In the long winter between October and April, there were 3 things that I remember as the particular substance of those months. Not the seal and not the ratification, and not the administrative consequence of either, but the 3 things that happened in the ordinary course of days and that matter more, when I try to account for what I built that winter, than anything formal. The first was a conversation in November, the second week, in the small dining room after dinner when the kitchen had cleared, and we were both still at the table in the particular way you stay at a table when neither person is ready for the evening to end. It was the first time that had happened. I did not comment on it. I simply stayed, and she stayed, and the fire in the small grate burned down by degrees. She was looking at the table, not at me, not at the fire, but at the grain of the wood, the way a person looks when they are thinking about something at a sufficient depth that the actual visual field doesn't particularly matter. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes, I said. Why did you come down from the dais? I thought about this. I don't know, I said. I don't remember deciding to. I remember being on my feet, and then I remember being at the edge of the seal. But you didn't send a guard, she said. Or Dre, you came yourself. Yes. Is that what you usually do, when something happens in the Hall of Oaths that you don't expect? No, I said. I usually wait and manage the situation from the dais, where I can see the whole room and respond to multiple things at once. I thought about it. I didn't wait. I came down. She nodded, not satisfied exactly, more as though this confirmed something she had already thought. And what were you going to do when you got there? She said. I looked at her. I don't know, I said again. I didn't have a plan. I searched for the right word, acting rather than planning, responding to something that felt more urgent than protocol. And was it? In retrospect, I said yes. If I had stayed on the dais and managed it from a distance, called Dre, sent a guard, handled it formally, you'd have been standing there in the middle of the seal's light in a room full of people processing their astonishment, with no one near you, for an undetermined amount of time. She was quiet. You came down because of that, she said. I think so, I said, not because I'd reason it out, just because that was not right. She looked at her hands on the table. I was fine, she said. I want you to know that I wasn't afraid. I know, I said. You weren't, I could see that. But it was, she paused, choosing. It was good that you came, not because I needed someone, because it was the right thing for the moment to have in it. I sat with that for a while. How did it feel, I said, when the seal lit? She considered the question with care. Like being recognized, she said slowly, by something that didn't care about anything I'd done or failed to do or been told about myself. It just found the thing I actually was and said so. She looked up. I don't know how to describe it better than that. That's accurate, I said. Is that what the bond felt like for you, she said, when your wolf went still? Not quite, I said. The bond felt like coming to rest. Not recognition, exactly. More like arriving somewhere I'd been walking toward for a very long time without knowing where I was going. She looked at me across the table. That's different from recognition, she said. Yes, recognition implies you found something. Coming to rest implies the thing was there, and you finally got there. She thought about this. Both could be true at the same time, she said. Yes, I said, I think they are. We stayed at the table for another hour. We talked about the autumn administrative reports, which had a section on the North Road she wanted to discuss, and then about a letter she had received from Tessin about the state of the herb garden, which the early cold snap had stressed in ways she had predicted and had told Tessin how to manage, and then about nothing in particular. At some point the fire went out entirely, and neither of us got up to rebuild it, and the room was quiet and cold in a way that was comfortable rather than unpleasant. When she finally stood to go, she said, "Thank you." For what? I said. For answering the question, she said, and for coming down from the dais. She left. I sat in the cold dining room for a while after. My wolf was entirely settled. The second thing was in December, the week before the ratification. There was a morning meeting, a small one, just myself and Dre and Fenwick and the senior records officer, reviewing the documentation that would be presented to the council for the formal confirmation. It was a procedural meeting, the kind where the decisions have already been made, and the purpose is to verify that the paperwork reflects them accurately. Senna was not at the meeting. She was in the restricted archive with Orvith, as she was most mornings by that point. But near the end of the meeting, when we had moved from the sealed documentation to the question of her formal designation, what title she would hold, in what capacity, with what administrative standing, Fenwick said something that I have thought about many times since. We should be careful, he said, not to constrain what she actually is by the formal designation we choose. I looked at him. What I mean, he said carefully, is that the formal designations we have for a bonded mate are designed for people in a particular role, ceremonial, primarily, presiding over certain kinds of social function. The formal expectations of the Luna's position have not traditionally included, for example, reviewing the restricted archive for boundary charter translation errors. No, I said. She's not a traditional case, Fenwick said. She's a person of considerable practical capability who has arrived at a significant position and will want to use that capability in ways the traditional designation wasn't designed for. He paused. I think the formal designation should be accurate rather than constrictive. Whatever formal title she holds, the working role should be defined by what she actually does and what she actually contributes, not by what a traditional Luna was expected to do 200 years ago. I looked at Dre. Dre looked at me with his controlled expression. Lord Fenwick is correct, he said. I've been thinking the same thing. So has she, I said. I suspect she hasn't raised it because she's been waiting to see whether we'd figure it out ourselves. Fenwick smiled a small smile, the kind he reserved for things he found genuinely satisfying. That sounds accurate, he said. What do you recommend? I said. They recommended a designation that was formally correct as a bonded mate's title, and that additionally specified advisor in council to the Alpha King on matters of territory, archive, and administration, which had no exact precedent in Ashenvale's history, but which described accurately what she had been doing for 6 weeks and what she would presumably continue to do. I brought the draft designation to her that evening. She read it twice. The advisor in council section, she said. Yes. That was Fenwick's suggestion. And Dre's and mine. She looked at the paper. It's accurate, she said. I know, I said. It's more accurate than I expected. We've been paying attention, I said. She looked at me with the expression I had come to recognize, the territory between surprise and something warmer than surprise. Good, she said, and she gave the paper back, and the designation was what it was. The third thing was in January. There was a morning, ordinary winter, the citadel stone cold and the library particularly warm because Orvith had rebuilt the fire in the north alcove to its maximum useful size, in the way of a man who has someone working in his library who is not accustomed to the cold and has adjusted his habits accordingly without being asked. She was at the reading table when I came in. The 7th text was open in front of her, the original from the restricted archive in the old tongue. She was reading it with the kind of stillness she reserved for things she was finding significant. She looked up. The word in the 7th text, she said. The one I thought was first bond recognized. I was right about the translation error, but I think I was slightly wrong about the correction. What's the right correction? I said. It's not first bond recognized, she said. It's first bond chosen. The verb is different from what I initially read it as. She turned the text toward me. Here, this verb. In the old tongue there are 2 forms, one for a recognized or discovered bond and one for a bond that is simultaneously discovered and chosen. This is the second form. I looked at the text. She was right. The first bond discovered and chosen, I said. Not just discovered, she said. Not passively happened upon. The original text specifies that the bond the seal is designed to find is one that will be chosen, not just found. She looked at the text. The seal can find the bloodline, but the bloodline alone doesn't fulfill the compact. It's the bloodline in a person who will choose the bond. She looked up. The seal waited 400 years because the bloodline was there, but the people who carried it may not have been the right people to choose it, or the timing wasn't right, or something. She paused. The seal knew. I was very still. The seal was designed to wait for you, I said. Specifically, not just someone with the bloodline. Someone with the bloodline who would choose it, she said. Not a passive vessel, a person who actually would. She was quiet. The library fire burned steadily. The old tongue text lay between us. I'm the one who would, she said, not as pride, as simple statement. Yes, I said. She looked at the text for a moment longer. Then she closed it with the careful precision she gave to old texts and looked at me. I wanted you to know that, she said, because it matters to me that the choosing is real, and it is. It was mine to make. She paused. And I made it. I know, I said. Good, she said. She opened the 8th text. We stayed in the library all morning. There is not a great deal more to say that the months themselves haven't already said, except this. In September of the 2nd year, After the lavender had bloomed in the south bed, and Tessin had moved into the house with the south-facing garden, and the bee yard had been established under Brennan's management, with Senna's enthusiastic involvement in the honey harvest. And after the Eastern water rights dispute was fully resolved, and the North Road Bridge was repaired, and the crop rotation for the river districts had been restored for the spring planting, and the Gramus boundary charter had been corrected in the official records. After all of that, Orvith completed the re-indexing of the entire East Wing. He came to the library at the end of the day when the work was done, and Senna was there as she usually was on Thursdays, and they looked at the result of 8 months of systematic effort together. It was, by any measure, considerably better than what had been there before. The organization was clear, the drainage classifications were properly separated from the climate records, the settlementara texts were cross-referenced with the modern administrative documents, and the restricted archive had a proper index for the first time in its history. Orvith stood at the west end of the room and looked at it. "I've been meaning to do this for 15 years, he said. "It's done now," Senna said. "It would have taken me 15 more years to do it alone," he said. "You didn't do it alone," she said. He looked at her. He was a precise and reserved man, not much given to expansive statements. "No," he said, "I didn't." He paused. "Thank you." "It was my pleasure," she said. And she meant it, which he could see, and which meant, to a man who knew the difference between performative courtesy and genuine satisfaction, more than the words themselves. He left. She stayed. She was at the reading table with the record keeper's most recent letter, the woman from Rian's village, who was still writing, whose letters had become longer and more detailed as the correspondence continued. I came in at the end of the afternoon, as I sometimes did on Thursdays. She looked up. "The record keeper says there may be 2 more lineages," she said. "Women who went east rather than southwest, different villages, different generations." I sat down. "Does she know where?" I said. "She has names," she said. "Not locations, not yet." She looked at the letter. "She's 83. She's trying to write everything down before." She stopped. "She says she wants to make sure the knowledge is kept." "Like your grandmother," I said. "Like all of them," she said. "All the women who kept the thread and didn't see the end of it." She was quiet. "I want to go to her when we can, to Rian's village. I want to meet her." "We'll go in the spring," I said, "after the planting." She looked at me. "After the planting," she said, not repeating it as a question, repeating it as a person repeats something that is exactly right. "The south bed will be established by May," I said. "Brennan can manage it. We could travel for 3 weeks, meet the record keeper, see the village, look at whatever she has to show us." Senna was quiet for a moment. "I'd like that very much," she said. "I know," I said. She looked at me across the reading table with the attention she had given things since November. The same quality, the same fullness, unchanged and deepening. "You've been planning that," she said. "Since February," I said, "when you told me about your grandmother wanting to see what she needed to see before she went." She held my gaze. "That was specific," she said. "You were specific," I said. "It deserved a specific response." She was quiet for a moment longer. Then she set down the letter and reached across the table, not for my hand this time, but for the edge of the text she'd been reading, folding the page with the care she gave to old documents, doing the ordinary thing of ending the reading day. "I'm going to find more of them," she said, not to me exactly, to the room or to the future or to herself. "The other lineages, the other threads." "Yes," I said. "We'll need a record, a proper one, not just the scattered texts in 12 places." She looked at the East Wing. "Orvith will hate the idea of a new index." "He'll love it," I said. She considered. "You're probably right," she said. "He'll complain first and then love it." "That's usually the order," I said. She stood. The day's reading was done. The library was warm and the fire was steady, and outside the autumn light was doing what autumn light does in Ashenvale, gathering itself into the last golden hour before the dark comes early, filling the corridor windows with a light that has no warmth in it but has a great deal of clarity. "The seal waited 400 years, she said, "for the right person at the right time." "Yes," I said. "I've been thinking about that a great deal," she said. "What it means for the forward thread, for the women who will carry it after us." "What have you concluded?" I said. "That it will take as long as it takes," she said. "And that the right thing to do in the meantime is to make sure the thread is kept, and the knowledge is kept, and the people who need to be ready are ready." She picked up her notes. "My grandmother trusted the timing and prepared me. We can do the same. Whatever comes after, we can leave them what they need." She went to the door. "Senna," I said. She turned. "We," I said. "You said we." She looked at me with her full attention. "Yes," she said, "we." She went out. I stayed in the library for a while after, in the warm room, with the old texts in their properly indexed cabinets, and the record-keeper's letter on the table, and the sound of the citadel going about its evening business in the corridors outside. The sound of a place that is inhabited rather than simply occupied. The sound of a place where people are actually present, doing what they actually do. My wolf was at peace with everything. He had been at peace, in this particular foundational way, since February in the library when she had held my hands back and said every day. He did not need to say anything further. He had said everything he needed to say in November in the Hall of Oaths, when he had gone still and come to rest and known what he knew. I sat in the library and thought about the forward thread, the women further east who had carried the bloodline in other villages, under other names, for 400 years of not knowing. The record-keeper who was 83 and writing everything down with the urgency of a woman who knows that what you leave behind is what persists. My mother, who had taught me the old tongue at 6 and died at my 13, and never told me why it mattered but had been right. Rien, who had known what she was leaving her granddaughter, and had trusted the girl who would become the woman to use it when the time came. The thread is long. It goes back further than any of the 12 texts can trace, to a time when the compact was made, and the seal was forged, and someone had the foresight to build a witness out of metal rather than men. And it goes forward. Whatever else is true, whatever the record-keeper has yet to send us, whatever we find in Rien's village in the spring, whatever the women further east have carried in their villages, and their teaching, and their careful preservation of things they did not entirely understand but believed in anyway, the thread goes forward. We hold it now. We will hold it as long as we have it to hold. Every day. I have not spoken much about the practical shape of what governance became after February, the specific texture of what it means to govern alongside someone rather than simply with support from good advisors. Perhaps this is because it is difficult to make the daily ordinary seem significant, and yet the daily ordinary was in fact the most significant part of it. What it looked like in practice was this. On a Tuesday in March, the North Road Infrastructure Review Team returned with their findings. The northernmost bridge was in worse condition than the estimate had suggested, not dangerous for summer passage, but likely to close in the spring thaw for an extended period if it was not addressed before winter fully released its hold. The estimate Senna had compiled in November was still accurate for the repair costs. The materials she had identified as locally sourceable were still locally sourceable. The timing was tighter than expected. She was at the table when the report arrived. She read it in under 10 minutes, made 3 notes, and said, "If we begin sourcing the timber and the ironwork this week, the repair can start by the 1st of April. 3 weeks of work at the bridge means it would be complete before the thaw conditions reach that section of the road." Dre looked at her notes. "The timber comes from the Westmere Forestry Holdings," he said. "We'd need their cooperation on priority supply." Lord Westmere owes Ashenvale a favor from the boundary adjustment in December, she said. She looked at me. Do you want to write to him, or shall I draft something for your signature? Draft it, I said. She drafted it in 20 minutes. It was a model of the form, specific, courteous, clear about what was needed and when, and containing a subtle but unmistakable reference to the December boundary adjustment that Westmere would understand as the favor being called in without the letter ever stating this explicitly. Dre read it and made no expression. This will work, he said. Send it today, I said. Westmere replied in 6 days, in the affirmative. The timber began moving toward the bridge site within the week. The ironwork came from the Citadel's own stores, which Senna had identified as adequate for the purpose when she was reviewing the infrastructure inventory in January. The bridge was repaired by the 28th of March, 2 days before the spring thaw conditions reached that section, and was passable throughout the difficult weeks. The road from Graving to the market towns was open for the full planting season for the first time in 23 years. None of this appeared in any formal record as Senna's work. It appeared as infrastructure maintenance, as efficient sourcing, as timely communication with a territorial lord. The name attached to the dispatch was mine, the efficiency that made it work was hers. This was, for some time, the shape of how it went, not from any deliberate concealment, but because we had not yet established the formal designation, because the council was still in the process of adjusting to her presence, because the machinery of a large pack kingdom adjusts its habits slowly no matter how clear the new direction is. She did not seem to mind. When I raised this with her in February, whether it troubled her that her work was not being formally credited, she considered it for a moment and then said, "The work is getting done. That's the important thing." "It matters who does it," I said. "Yes," she said, "and everyone who was in the room when it was done knows who did it. That's enough for now." She paused. "Give it time. Things that are clearly true tend to become officially recognized eventually." She was right. The formal designation in December made it official what had been clearly true for weeks. After that, the council's working documents began to include her contributions by name, because Dre started writing them that way and the council followed Dre's precedent without discussion. Fenwick commented on it once at the end of a long council day when we were the last 2 remaining in the chamber. "She's changed how we work," he said. "Yes," I said. "In ways that will persist," he said. "The re-indexing, the reporting format, the boundary review process, those will still be in use long after the people who implemented them are gone." "That's the point of good work," I said. "Yes," he said. "But it's worth saying. The things she set in motion are the kind of things that persist and improve because they were done right the first time." He left. I sat in the council chamber for a while, thinking about persistence, about the forward thread and the things that last and the difference between governing through a term of rule and building something that continues to be useful after you are not there to maintain it. She had been thinking about that longer than I had. The seed catalog she had compiled from the restricted archive records, a running list of historical crop varieties mentioned in the settlement texts that might still exist somewhere and might be recoverable, had already resulted in the winter barley discovery. She was continuing it, adding varieties as she found references to them, with the patience of someone who knows that a catalog's value accumulates slowly and is not diminished by the time it takes. Orvith had added it to the archive's official holdings. It was, as far as either of them had been able to determine, the only catalog of its kind. There was an afternoon in late March, a week before the ceremony, the last ordinary week before the spring ceremony changed the official shape of things, when she was in the restricted archive and I was in the study, and I had approximately 40 minutes between dispatches, and I found myself walking in the direction of the restricted archive, not for any particular reason other than that the afternoon felt like it had a pull toward that direction. Orvith was at the door when I arrived. He was carrying an armful of documents that he was preparing to return to their proper locations, now that the new index made that process straightforward rather than approximate. "My lord," he said. "She's inside," I said. "Yes," he said. He looked at me with the expression he had been wearing for several months when I appeared in the library's vicinity for no stated reason, not the expression of a man judging, the expression of a man who has observed something and found it entirely satisfactory. "She's found a reference to the second lineage," he said. "In the 10th text. She wanted to verify it against the original." "Good," I said. He moved aside. I went in. The restricted archive was a narrow room below the library level, stone walls, the particular cold of deep-embedded stone, 2 working lamps on the single long table, and 6 cabinets of original documents. She was at the table with the original 10th text open in front of her and 3 sheets of notes. She looked up when I came in. "The second lineage," she said. "The 10th text describes a woman who went north, not east, 230 years ago. It mentions a specific village, which I can try to locate on the territorial maps." "Do you know the village name?" I said. She read it to me in the old tongue, then in the modern approximation. "North Keswick," I said. "It's a small community about 4 days' ride, in the Grayville territories." She looked at me. "You know it," she said. "I've had correspondence with the Grayville Lord twice in 11 years, I said. "Both times about the late spring floods. It's a community in a flood valley, not prosperous but stable. Good people." She was looking at me with the particular quality she had for receiving information that connected multiple things. "Flood Valley," she said. "Yes. And the 10th text describes a woman who went to the place where the water speaks in 2 seasons, she said. I thought it was poetic, but a flood valley would speak in 2 seasons, spring flood and summer quiet. "It would," I said. She made a note. I sat down across the table. "When we go to see the record keeper," she said, "could we route north through Grayville on the way back?" "Easily," I said. She nodded. "Then we might have 3 things in the spring, the record keeper, the Grayville community, and the planting." She looked at her notes. "I want to find them, the other lineages. I want them to know that the thread is known." "Yes," I said. She looked at me. "Thank you," she said, "for listening to that. For taking it seriously." "You take it seriously," I said. "That's sufficient reason." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she returned to the 10th text. We worked in the restricted archive until the lamps burned low, which was longer than I had intended to stay, and exactly as long as I wanted to be there. That is the truth of it. That is what those months were. And when the spring came and the lavender bloomed and the ceremony was done, and the bee yard was established and Tessin was in the south-facing house, and the record keeper's letters were stacked on the table in the library, when all of it was simply true and present and ongoing. What I felt was not the triumph of a thing accomplished, but the deep steadiness of a thing that is continuing. That will continue. The seal waited 400 years. We will not wait, we have already begun. Every day is more of it. That is the right word for it, finally. More. Not better, not larger, not more dramatic or more certain or more resolved. Simply more inhabited, more tended, more built. The way a garden grows more itself with every season's care, not because anything dramatic happens, but because something that was planted in good faith and tended with attention becomes, gradually and irreversibly, what it was always going to be. She showed me that. She showed me everything that matters, simply by being exactly who she was. And the seal found her as it had been made to find her, and I came down from the dais because it was not right for her to stand there alone, and in doing that unreasoned, instant, unmanaged thing, I did the best thing I have ever done in my life. And from there, We built everything we have built, which is still building and will be still. The thread goes forward. We hold it. Every day.